Ever wonder what the largest catfish caught in Minnesota looked like? Or how big was the state's record northern? To find out, we went to the Minnesota Fishing Museum in Little Falls.
Hi, I'm Mavis Buker. I'm the Executive Director here at the Minnesota Fishing Museum. I've been here since 2009 and been privileged to inherit a wonderful collection of Minnesota fishing paraphernalia, to care for it, and to continue to receive donations of more fishing paraphernalia as it comes along. As people come in the front door, they come into our gift shop. You walk in on our floor, which is designed to be reminiscent of a dock. Our front counter is actually a boat. It's a 1946 Larson boat that had been donated to the museum. It was in pretty tough shape, so with the donor's approval, we went ahead and turned that into our front counter. Then as you proceed into the museum itself, we have fishing lures, we have motors, we have a few boats, we have rods and reels and minnow buckets, we have spearfishing decoys for winter fishing, we have snowmobiles for going out on the lake. Just about anything that you would have seen used to go fishing in Minnesota, summer or winter, we've got a pretty good sample of what that might be. The museum itself started in 1998. Our founder is Al Baert. Al is a gentleman who lives in Sartell, Minnesota. And when he had retired after a couple of careers, first in the military and then with the state of Minnesota, he had a collection of things and had reached a point where he needed to find a home for it and decided to create a museum.
People ask how the museum started. Well, in 1989, I called a friend in Fort Worth, Texas, and he said, "You know, Al, I was looking at this lure book and I thought about you. He said, you ought to be a collector up there in Minnesota." So I said, "Get me the book if it doesn't cost too much." And I, for 3 months, was going to be a big-time collector. Mr. B's collector. After that 3 months, I took 6 lures to the sport show in St. Cloud. I had that pikey minnow, the surfer Reno, and 4 other lures. And this appraiser shoved them aside, and 4 of them, and called them junk. But the surfer Reno, he was telling me, well, it's got 2 props, it's got glass eyes, it's 1919. Had the audacity after about 15 minutes to say, "Al, I'll give you $3 for it." Well, Carl White's book showed it worth 75 to 100 then. I got mad and I went home and told Jean, my wife, I'm going to start the Minnesota Fishing Museum. And that's what did it.
In 1998, then, he found that the city of Little Falls was very receptive to the idea of having this museum. So with a little bit of help from our friends, as the old song goes, the city offered some help with the museum as far as being a fiscal agent to receive some grants. They gave a loan for startup to help things going along, and a 501c3 nonprofit organization was formed. And then from that was the very beginning of the museum. Now, people have donated fishing artifacts from day one. And so many of Al's friends donated things, then their friends donated things, right up to the present, where when people come and visit the museum, they'll go, "Aha, I have a whatever at home. Would you be interested in having it here in the museum?" And so it really represents Minnesota's fishing heritage, and it's from the people of Minnesota. It's not from some grand scheme with a top-down kind of vision. It's very much from the grassroots and let's put it together kind of vision. We've got approximately somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 square feet. It just depends on if you count every nook and cranny. We like to say in our land of 10,000 lakes, we have 10,000 artifacts related to fishing in Minnesota. Now that counts every little hook, and so some things are pretty small and repetitive and some things are very large. But roughly 8,000 to 10,000 is both square feet and also the amount of artifacts that we have. We don't have room to put everything on display at one time. So we do store things and we rotate them. So we'll have approximately 98, 99 old motors on display at any one time. And they're kind of woven throughout the whole museum, starting with our oldest from 1902. And then going into the 19-teens with the gas-powered motors, the old, what they called knuckle busters. You had to crank them to start them. And then once that would engage, the knob that you were using to crank would spin around. And thus the term knuckle buster, get those fingers out of the way. The displays just move right on through the seasons and the century. We have a couple of lures that go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, then all the way up almost to the present, actually. Part of the mission of the museum is to preserve and display the artifacts, but beyond that, to be an educational resource. And so we like to take and preserve the old things and show them, but then as we've moved through the years, to also display some of the things that are currently happening in the world of fishing. So from very old right up to the present. In terms of rotating our displays, typically we use our winter months for the in-depth cleaning and major changeouts. That's the time where we might undertake a complete renovation of a display or create one from scratch. Throughout the season, however, we do rotate 5% of the things. When people have donated objects to us, oftentimes they'll give us a call and say, we're going to bring family and come and visit the museum. And so we love when they do that, because then we can check where their particular items are. And if they happen to be in storage, then we pull them out so the family can enjoy them as well. That's one of the things that we like, that real folksy, down home, it's everybody's museum, let's make everybody feel good about what they're doing here. A wonderful example of how that display coming together works is, for many years, people would drop off depth finders. Somebody would have the old Lowrance green box and they would leave it with us. Somebody had another old depth finder, but we'd put them aside because you really can't do a whole lot with one depth finder. Eventually we had a handful of depth finders. A summer ago, a fella drove up and he said, I have quite a few depth finders and I'm getting rid of my things and dispersing things. Would you be interested in having them? And I said, of course. And we proceeded to discuss the donation policy. And he said, yes, I definitely want to give them to you. He then proceeded to unload 84 depth finders. That represented from the Lowrance green box to the paper graphs to the digital readouts to all kinds of depth finders. So all of a sudden we went from very few to a huge amount. And now what were we going to do? So as so many things happen here, we have volunteers, lots of volunteers. Things don't get done without our volunteer force. So we had a fellow who said, you know, I've got some time over the winter months. I'll just kind of, go through them all. From that, we narrowed it down to a collection that we had decided we wanted to keep. And so we put together that following last spring then, a complete display with depth finders going from 1957 through 2002. And for those of us who think, well, 2002 museum, that doesn't seem right, I always remind people that in the world of electronics, 2002 is ancient, as fast as things change nowadays. And we had talked about our founder earlier. Al was just a gem because he then put together the original depth finder for me, which consisted of a nice long rope with markers every foot apart that was on a spool, so with a weight at the bottom. And so if you ever really wanted to know how deep you were, all you had to do is drop that down, and when you got to the bottom, you would count how many feet you had. So fishermen have been very creative from the early days forward. Only the toys have changed, but the concept is still very basic, very much the same. Let's see what kind of a lake we're in. Let's see how deep it is. What are the tools and artifacts that we can use to determine that? And that kind of became how the museum actually came to existence.
In April, the Minnesota Fishing Museum announced its merger with a similar organization, the Fishing Hall of Fame of Minnesota.
We have basically a three-legged stool in our mission statement. The first is to preserve the artifacts and have them on display. The second is to provide educational materials and opportunities for people of all ages. And the third is to recognize people, individuals, businesses that have contributed to the world of fishing, sport fishing in Minnesota. Well, there is an organization called the Fishing Hall of Fame of Minnesota, and their primary goal is to recognize individuals and businesses and organizations who have contributed significantly to the sport of fishing in Minnesota. And their secondary goal is to provide educational resources and materials and experiences so that they too can pass on this fishing heritage to the younger generation. So when you put those two organizations side by side, they just mesh so beautifully. So after some discussion with the board members of the Hall of Fame and the board members of the Fishing Museum, it became very apparent that there is a real desire to work together. So we are at the very front end of that merger. Together, we're definitely going to be able to be much more effective, both in providing those educational resources, but also to create a destination. Ultimately, we will be looking to put one location together where all of this can happen, and that's the real exciting part. So stay tuned, more to come is kind of how we want to go with that.
The Minnesota Fishing Museum in Little Falls. Make it a destination on your next family outing. You won't be disappointed.